Okay, so now we're going to talk about page 7 and 8 of the contract, starting with the J-1 inspection, maintenance, and warranties. Okay, so this talks about the inspection period where your buyer will have a period of time where they can do their due diligence with regard to a home inspector, any other inspections that the buyer would feel necessary. Sometimes buyers will want to bring in contractors or structural engineers, things like that. This is the typical period that a buyer would do those type of inspections. After this time frame has passed, the seller isn't going to expect that the buyer is going to want to come in the house again. So this is the period of time that you would also want to get all the other little things done, like such as measuring for, furniture, maybe bringing in decorators, things like that. This period of time is the time that the seller is expecting the buyer to be in the home. So the typical period of time is 15 days. This is a very strategic thing as well. When you're writing an offer and you want your offer to be strong, anything more than 15 would not be considered strong because typically sellers are informed that an inspection takes about 14 to 15 days. So anything more than that will set up a red flag for the seller. So unless you absolutely need more time for your inspection, keep it to about 15 days. If your buyer lives in the mainland or in Japan or China and they need to travel to Hawaii to do these inspections, that would be a good reason to make this period of time a little longer. But definitely need to make an explanation to the seller as to why you would need so long. Otherwise, you may get a counter offer if you're going to make this too long. You also might want to consider, if you want to make your offer strong, making this period of time a lot shorter, such as 7 days. These days, we can get a home inspector in the property within about 2 to 3 days from acceptance. So 7 days isn't all that difficult to do. It is a little less time, and the clock is ticking a little faster when you have a shorter period of time. But if a seller sees that his property is going to be off the market for 7 days, only 7 days, he might feel like that's a stronger offer, might want to consider working with you because he knows that within 7 days that he's going to have a commitment from the buyer. So again, if you want to make your offer stronger, the shorter you make this, the better. Now, when we talk about the time frame here and what is necessary to be done during that time, it is also important to remember that once this time frame passes and you've accepted the property and moved on, that there will be hardly anything that you would be able to do to cancel based on inspection situations. Obviously, if you're getting a mortgage, then everything is subject to the loan going through. That's one thing. But if you're going to cancel based on something that was found in the inspection and you've already passed your J-1, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to cancel after this time period passes. So again, if you have an inspection going on and you receive the inspection report and you find that there are things that need to be done, like maybe it's going to cost about $5,000 to $10,000 to repair certain things, you need to do all of your requests prior to this deadline expiring. So as you see here, it says buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph O2. And paragraph O2 specifies that you need to if you're going to cancel, it needs to be done within the time frame. So 15 days from the acceptance date, you'll want to calculate what that date is and make sure that you do all of your requests within that time frame. If you were to wait until this 15 days has passed, then the seller has no obligation to you to give you a credit, or he has no obligation to make any sort of repairs, and your buyer would no longer have the opportunity to cancel. One thing to consider too when you are working with an expiration of the J-1, that if, for example, you are going to be requesting a credit or if you're going to be asking for repairs, like I mentioned, you're going to need to do that within this time frame and get a response back from the seller also within this time frame. So if it's March 1st, and 15 days later you got March 15th would be the expiration of the J-1, you would need to have everything worked out with regard to the J-1 prior to end of business on March 15th. If you ask for anything on March 16th, there's no obligation on the seller to do anything for you. So it's very important that you do everything prior to the expiration of this time frame. So for example, let's say you found that there is some serious problems, maybe the roof has a big hole in it or something, and you are expecting the seller to repair that prior to closing. You're going to need to put in your J-1 request prior to the expiration, and then also give yourself time to get a response back by the seller, because once you turn in that J-1 request to the seller, it's almost like putting in an offer and waiting to hear back from the seller on whatever they're going to do. So if it's a deal killer, having that repair made or having that credit, you're going to want to have a response back by the seller also before the expiration ends. So if it's March 15th and you sent the seller a request to, repair the roof or get a credit of $10,000 to repair the roof prior to closing, you're going to want that seller's response by the end of business on March 15th. Now, what do you do if you don't get that response? You're going to need to be prepared with whatever your decision is going to be. So like I said, if it's a deal killer, you're going to need to cancel the transaction prior to the expiration. So have your cancellation ready to go if you're not hearing back from the seller on anything, because it could be that the seller just going to let it run its course and not answer you. If they don't answer you and you don't do anything with regard to either canceling or approving, then the next day it's all deemed waived, as if you never asked for anything, and the seller's assuming that you're moving forward with the transaction. So whatever the decision is, it needs to be made on the day of this expiration, not after. So it's very important that you do that. Okay, moving along to J3, property condition maintenance and final walkthrough. So this is the period of time that a buyer has to do the final walkthrough. And you kind of want to do this as close to closing as possible because of all of the things that need to be done prior to closing, such as the seller needs to move all their things out, the seller needs to clean the place, the seller needs to get rid of all of the things in the garage, all of the debris, paint cans, all that stuff that's kind of like lingering around the home. Everything needs to be cleared out. So you kind of want to do your walkthrough after all of those things have been done. So typically we like to put in 3 days prior to closing. And what this means is that if you whatever time frame you put in here, your final walkthrough needs to be done no later than 3 days prior to closing. So if you wait till 2 days prior to closing, you're pretty much waiving any rights that you have with regard to the final walkthrough. And what are you doing during your final walkthrough? So let's say, for example, you had asked for repairs to be made during the J1 and you had the seller agree to making repairs, that sort of thing. So with your J1 inspection repair list that you have signed by the seller and by the buyer that it's agreed upon set of repairs, you're going to want to take that with you to the final walkthrough and make sure that the seller has done all of those bulleted punch list items. If anything is not done during your final walkthrough, you would make a note of what wasn't done, and you would then prepare a final walkthrough approval or basically disapproval if something wasn't done, and then you would then request for funds to be withheld from escrow, which is J4. We're going to talk about that next. But basically, your job during the final walkthrough is to make sure that everything that the seller said he was going to do is completed. And if something is not completed, then we would worry about handling that by way of J4, which is withholding of funds. Other things to look at when you're doing your final walkthrough was the property cleaned? Typically, the cleaning should be done by the time you do your final walkthrough. The seller is not obligated in any way through the contract to remove their items from the house. Well, at least the furnitures. There's nothing in the contract that says that they have to move all their furniture out. So it would be ideal that they did this. But if for some reason you do go into the property and the seller has not moved the furnitures out and you have like couches on top of carpet, that sort of thing, you might want to request an extension on your J-1, or you could then withhold a certain amount of money in escrow because you were not able to see beyond pictures on the walls. You may not be able to see under the furniture to see if there's any burns in the carpet or holes in the carpet or stains, that sort of thing. If something is not, you're not able to check to see if anything was done, or if there's any damage under something, then you would want to make sure that you withhold funds for that. Okay, so moving on to J4, we talk about withholding of funds. So you're going to see with the final walkthrough and with the removal of items from the property, the cleaning and the pet treatment, those types of things, if those items are not completed prior to your walkthrough, they specify within those paragraphs that if they are not done, that they are subject to J4. So when we talk about J4, withheld collected funds for repairs and maintenance, this is the period of time that you have to get that particular list of repairs or withholdings to escrow no later than 1 day prior to closing. That way, if you do your final walkthrough 3 days prior to closing and you notice that there's things that need to be funds held back for, you want to make sure you have plenty of time from your walkthrough to get those requests in writing to escrow. So that's why they say here, if seller has failed to maintain the property pursuant to paragraph J3, which is this final walkthrough, or has not completed any agreed upon repairs or corrections no later than 1 day. So let's say you do your final walkthrough and you notice that there was maybe a hole in the wall that needed to be drywall patched, something like that, and it wasn't done for the final walkthrough. You still have the seller still has a few more days to get those things done. Of course, then it opens it back up where you can go back in and double check that it was done, because if it wasn't, then you would have the right to withhold the funds. Now, if they haven't done that, then you would prepare, or the transaction coordinator would prepare a final walkthrough disapproval, and the fact that you want funds held back, they will prepare a form to send to escrow to give instruction to do that. Now, a lot of times you may not know what the cost is going to be. It says to collect 150% of the estimated costs, so then you would need to get, if it was some kind of drywall, you might want to get some contractor or handyman to come in and give an estimate on what it would cost. So that might be something that you would want to do also during your walkthrough, is have a handyman there if there was a huge list of repairs that needed to be made, so that the handyman could give you some good feedback on what it's going to cost, because you're going to need to have an amount set for escrow to collect at closing. Then it talks about if things are not done prior to closing, and then you would hold back the 150. Any bills that would be billed for the work, like let's say there was jealousy cranks that needed to be fixed, or let's say the carpet needed to be replaced, or something like that, escrow would then hold back the funds, and then you would have the vendors send their bills to escrow, and escrow would then pay those vendors out of the withholding. And so that way, it's escrow is managing the money, not you, the agents. And there wouldn't be any fighting over anything. Escrow would do their job with withholding the funds from the seller's proceeds and hold it, and they would actually do the paying of the bills within escrow. That way, if it is a little cheaper, then after those bills have been paid, if there's any money left over, that would be refunded back to the seller. Now, if for some reason the repairs are not made in the appropriate time, which would be this period right here, this specifically says that if they're not completed within 5 days after closing, said funds will be dispersed to the buyer. What that means is that we are giving the seller a certain period of time to get those repairs done with the withholding, but should they fail to do that, then the buyer just gets the money, and then the buyer can then take care of it themselves, and escrow would then release the funds to the buyer, and that would be done after closing. But that we would definitely have to give the seller this due period to to try to get it done. And we don't like to make this period of time really long because obviously the buyer wanted these things to be done prior to closing. But some things happen, where you schedule people and they're not able to make it on time, or they need a week's notice or something. So we like to try to give at least a good week or a little less than a week after closing for the seller to be able to still try to perform those repairs. But then again, if they are not done, there is a recourse with that 150% being withheld to be delivered back to the buyer. Okay. So moving along to existing warranties and plans. This is the section that talks about anything with regard to the appliances in the home, refrigerator, washer, dryer, things like that. Anything that the seller would have in their person that they would need to leave those things behind. So you will always see when you buy a home, you'll see drawers full of like all of the warranties, all of the plans for the home. That kind of stuff is always in those drawers in the kitchen that the seller should leave behind. So if you are representing a seller, make sure that they don't pack these things and that they stay in the home so that the buyer could then have those things to look at if something were to go wrong with any of the appliances and things like that. The other warranties could be things like a termite treatment warranty, a homeowner's warranty, like a American Home Shield warranty, things like that should be left in the home. And there's no period of time there. It's just a checkbox here to say that those things need to be left behind. Removal of items from the property. So again, this is something that we would like to have done prior to the final walkthrough. So the days here should always be longer than the final walkthrough so that these things can be completed prior to your final walkthrough. And we usually like to say, between 4 and 5 days prior to closing, that seller shall dispose all of the unwanted personal belongings, trash, junk. This could be things like paint cans, old wood beams, things like that. Any kind of debris around the house, like maybe some old broken planters, anything that would not really be considered that would go with the house, that need to clean up around the property, making sure that all of the trash cans are emptied, things like that. So if for some reason there were some items that were not removed and the seller just split and left all this stuff in there, you may have to hire a handyman to come in and remove it, where a handyman might charge like $100 to come out and clean up all of the debris around the house, take out all the paint cans and clean everything up. And you might have to have the place pressure washed or something like that. You will want to, if that's not done, you would then specify a withholding for that under J-4, and then all of the terms from J-4 would apply for that. Okay. Then talking about the J-9 cleaning, typically when a buyer buys a home, he wants the home to be cleaned. Professional cleaning, a lot of people like to hire a cleaning person that they may have hired to clean their own home. I don't think you have to specifically hire a professional company like the maids or anything, because it doesn't say here to hire a professional cleaning company, but they do specify the things that need to be cleaned. And a lot of times when you have cleaned a property, a buyer may not necessarily think that your idea of cleaning is their idea of cleaning. So in some cases, it might even be just best to give a cleaning credit of possibly $500, depending on the size of the house. You might want to consider just doing a cleaning credit. That way there's no fighting going on about it's not clean to this buyer's expectations. I have been in that situation before where I did hire a professional cleaning company, the maids, and they didn't quite clean the jealousy windows good enough, and I had to hire a window person to come out. So had I just given a cleaning credit, the buyer would then be able to hire whoever they want and get the place as clean as they want, and they would have the money to do it. That way there's no fighting going on. But if you'd rather just have the seller take care of it, then you want to have it done 4 to 5 days prior to closing. That's the typical amount of time, so that it is done prior to your final walkthrough. The key here is to try to get everything done before the final walkthrough so that you have a nice clean property to walk into, to do a really good assessment of the property being in the same condition that it was during the J-1, and that nothing has happened since your inspection any different than when you had seen it before. So it's really good to have the whole place completely clean and nobody living there. Everybody moved out, cleaned, etc. Okay, again, if the place is not cleaned when you walk in there and you're worried that maybe they are not going to do it, then and they haven't done the cleaning according to the time frame here, then you would want to make sure that you withhold 150% of what the cleaning cost would be. So if it was $500 to do a typical cleaning, then you would of course withhold, I guess, what is it, 750 or something like that. And we do like to put in here, and I'll show it to you later when we talk about the Q section, which is the special terms, where you can still check cleaning, but then should the seller not get the cleaning done within this time period, you can specify that if the cleaning wasn't done, then it's an automatic cleaning credit of $500, $600, whatever. And that way, if it wasn't done, it's already a condition in the contract that a credit would then be given. That way you won't have to do anything special at this point if it's not done. Okay? And then we talk about pet-related treatment. By the way, going back to cleaning, you need to understand that it does say here that the carpets need to be professionally shampooed. If you're working with a pretty savvy, if you are a very savvy buyer agent, you are going to want to make sure you get copies of the receipts for the work being done, because you want to make sure that they did do it, although they are not obligated to give you receipts, but it's up to you as a buyer's agent to just request the receipts, and hopefully the seller's agent would then provide them to you. But it does need to be professionally shampooed, and another reason why it needs to be professionally shampooed is because if there is pets there, you're going to want to make sure that the carpets are shampooed prior to the pet treatment, because that is a condition of the pet related treatment. Okay, and also if you are representing a seller, I would definitely recommend, if you're not going to hire a professional cleaning company, to hire a professional window cleaning company, because most cleaning people don't do windows, or at least they don't do windows to the extent of what a window cleaning company would do. And a lot of times a buyer is expecting all the windows to be pretty spotless when they come into the property. So something to think about when you're doing that. Okay, so pet related treatment. Now, if you are representing a seller, you need to think about this. If your client has a pet and in the contract you are requested to do pet related treatment, it is very important that the pets not be on the property when the pet treatment is done. That's obviously something that the pet related treatment company is going to tell you anyway, but the biggest thing is that you cannot bring the pets back. So you need to, when you're working on your timeline here, you need to keep that in mind, that pets need to be removed from the property. And a lot of times when people have a pet, they're going to keep that pet with them until the day that they move out, which could theoretically be 4 days prior to closing when they move everything out. So you've got to make sure that the seller is aware that the pet needs to be off the premises for the pet treatment, and that pet is not supposed to come back to the property, because if that pet had fleas, they could potentially bring fleas back into the property, and then that first treatment would have been for naught. So got to make sure that the pet does not come back to the property, and that as a buyer's agent you need to remind the seller of that. Typically there are 2 treatments. So the pet treatment company will come in and do a spray, and a lot of times buyers want to make sure that they are treated inside and outside, because outside is different from inside. You can treat inside, but then there could still be fleas and ticks out in the yard that could be brought in by the children or brought in by anybody else after you own the property. So pet treatment company will come in and spray everywhere, and then they will call you back in about 2 weeks to come in and do a second treatment. So that's why it's really important that it be done, the first treatment be done prior to closing, and then you can always schedule that second treatment with the new owner afterwards. It does say that if it is not done within 5 days after closing, that you could withhold the 150%. So it's got to make sure that you get this done, at least the first treatment done prior to closing. Okay, and that concludes the J-1 and all of the things associated with the final walkthrough on page 7 and 8 of the purchase contract. The next tutorial we'll be talking about the survey.